Last week's challenge was to build a waterproof, breathable, rodent-proof outdoor storage box. It's been a bit of an unconventional build. I've completely made it up as I've gone along, but I think I've done what I set out to. And it's not quite finished at the moment, it will be by the end of this video. So if, like me, you've got a big pile of cushions that are sat clogging up the house because you don't think it's safe enough to store them outside, well then today's video is for you. Last year I built this outdoor seating and we got a load of cushions made. I'd be lying if I said we'd use them much in this great weather we have here, but what is certain is they're clogging up the house and we were desperate to get them outside. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing online that could do the job, but things that look reasonably suitable are pretty expensive, and so I thought it'd be quite fun to build something myself specifically for these cushions, using wherever possible stuff that I had lying around. So after taking some measurements and having a scribble on my straight line pad, I went off to the builder's merchants and picked up 7 4.8 metre lengths of this treated timber. Now, it was late in the day at the builder's merchants and I made a snap decision to go for this 3x2 or 75 by 45 mil treated timber. 7 lengths, I think I only needed 6, cost me 60 quid. Now, I did wonder afterwards whether I should have actually ordered, to save a bit of money, something more like, this is actually cut down version of this, but that's kind of more like what your 2x2 or 15 mil square would look like. But you know, there's some pretty big dimensions in this thing. So I'm quite pleased I've got the added strength. Do you need strength in a storage box? And as you'll see in the video, I've ended up cutting down loads of this to make the various different components. So it has been quite useful using this, but maybe we'll have a bit of a chat later, or you can let me know in the comments what you think. So let's start with the construction of the main frame itself. The plan was to make the box with individual sides and back panels. This would make the process of lining the box much neater, more on that shortly. And the frame would be constructed from a series of very simple butt joints, with the rear vertical pillars being longer than the corresponding front pillars to create a slope for the roof. And by putting the sections together in this way, the longest span along the front would be stronger, benefiting from being turned on its wider 70mm side. These are pretty much all the dimensions you need, but I will be producing full detailed plans of the build. Construction was pretty simple, each piece cut on my sliding bevel saw and glued together with this waterproof gap filling adhesive. Why did I use this stuff? Well, again, I didn't have any waterproof PVA to hand. I had this left over from the garden furniture project, and I thought the gap filling properties would be useful if any of the joints weren't completely consistent. The joints were just buttered together. This wood is soft, but I find it useful to pilot each hole, switching down to a narrower diameter bit for this part of the joint, as it makes the whole process of screwing the two pieces so much easier and leads to a really firm joint. And in terms of the screws, I had 2 lengths handy, 6x100s and 6x150s, depending on which side of the timber I was screwing into, wide or narrow. I offset the holes slightly, anticipating that I'd be needing to put another screw through around about here when I screwed the frame together. And with one of the sides done, I could use that as a template to quickly create this second. And then I constructed the rear frame in the same way. So I wanted something to protect those slightly delicate cushions, both in terms of stopping them getting dirty or dusty, but also against the weather. This featherboarding will hopefully be the first line of defence against the pummeling of the rain, and we get a lot of that over here. But I wanted something else. I've got a big roll of damp-proof membrane. It might get a bit sweaty in the summer. I've got this Intello breathable membrane that I used on the kitchen insulation system. Video of that on screen now. But what I decided upon in the end was a big roll of this breathable underfelt, which was left over from the kitchen roofing project, which will hopefully do 2 jobs: keep the cushions in a decent condition whilst protecting them from any rain that does get through the feather edge boarding, and provide some sort of breathability. So I wrapped each panel in the membrane and temporarily stapled it in place, and then held them in position with clamps before screwing them together at the top and bottom, followed by the front horizontal base and top sections. The front is made this way rather than how I constructed the rear, because I'll be installing doors shortly. The box was progressing nicely. Next up, I had to increase the width of the front side pillars for the door detailing, and so I screwed this bit of timber reclaimed from another project to give me something to screw the doors to. But on much reflection, I removed it and went back to the 3x2 or 70x45, as I decided we needed more of an overlap for weatherproofing, as you'll see shortly. Next I had the floor to think about. The decision to wrap the panels in roof felt meant I had to screw some additional battens to the frame to support the new floor. Circular saw wasn't very happy, I think the wood was a bit wet. I used those side pillar battens I swapped out for some of it and then cut down some of that 45 by 70 for the remainder. I had a few sheets of OSB left over from the kitchen renovation project. This is why you can never throw away wood and why we're all such hoarders. Unfortunately though, it was pretty inaccessible. But with it freed, I could cut it down with my plunge saw. I did a video last weekend on when to use plunge and circular saws, and this project illustrates nicely how both can coexist on a project. And I had the cutouts to do. This was effort 1 before I increased those side pillars. And in case you're wondering what OSB is like outside, I mean this stuff is used in the construction industry a lot, but it's also pretty hardy, which I hadn't realised. This has actually been outside all winter and there's no obvious sign that it's rotted, really. The plan was to weatherproof the underside with Bedec barn door paint, which is so brilliant it's completely destroyed the tin. So my first job was to decant it into a new tin I bought on Amazon. I love this paint, not least because you don't need primer, you just water down the first coat. And secondly, because it's bulletproof. This fascia is showing no signs of deteriorating. So that's the underside. The top, again using paint lying around rather than buying anything new, I decided to paint in the Zinza All Coat I'm slowly repainting our external window frames with. 2 coats, a bit of a trim to make way for those enlarged pillars, and it was ready to install. I've lost my countersink bit, so I had the idea of screwing the floor down with lost tight screws. They're so small, you forget they're there. Next up, rodent proofing. Now they say our little furry friends can get through something the diameter of a biro. And I know from living in the countryside that they have a habit of making their home in nice places where we don't want them to. So I bought myself a roll of wire mesh. Now this was about 60 quid, so it has added to the cost. I'll be giving you a detailed breakdown of all the costings at the end of the vid. But it just gives me that added level of security because particularly with time, gaps can open up in the feather edging when it starts warping with the weather. And this stuff will give me the security that they're not going to get through even if that happens. Using my Dremel, pliers are fine but take a little bit longer, and do wear a mask though, as the metal dust generated by the cutting disc is substantial. And for obvious reasons, safety specs, I cut sections of mesh for the side and rear panels and stapled them to the frame. This is just to hold them in place until the feather edging goes on. And whilst this is probably overkill, I also meshed the underside as rodents tend to nest under boxes like this. And I boxed the mesh in with more of those 40 by 70 millimeter offcuts. So things were evolving pretty well from a pretty unclear start point, which is a bit like my DIY journey. I'm completely self-taught. And largely for that reason, and to help keep the lights on my channel, I've teamed up today with Woodworkers Guild of America, who have kindly agreed to sponsor this video. Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you'll know I don't do a lot of sponsorships, but I was drawn to working with them because their journey very much resonates with mine. A bit like you and I, they're an online community of like-minded woodworkers ranging from beginners to masters of their craft. And through membership, you can advance your skills and techniques from loads of step-by-step woodworking projects. Now, the first 1,000 subscribers to click on the link in the description below this video or on the QR code down here will get a full year's premium membership for just $1.49. And with that, boom, you've got access to an online resource for woodworking instructions, ideas, not to mention live streaming tutorials, Q&As, and access to the Woodworkers Guild of America community. I've been enjoying YouTube legend Jimmy DeResta's videos and also the wood turning content, as I'll shortly be bringing my old lathe back into action. I should just add that the offer is only valid for new members. Right, on with the video. It was time to clad the storage box, and so I bought 35 1.8 metre lengths of feather edge boarding for 59 quid from my local fencing supplier. Now, battens make it look smart and hide the cut edges. And you've guessed it, my circular saw and those lengths of 70 by 45, 3x2 depending on who you are, came to the rescue again. I cut a series of strips off just over 20mm thick, basically thick enough to hide the cut edge of the feather edging when overlapped by about 13mm. Then an additional cut reduced one of these pieces to 35mm wide to frame either side of the doorway and also to support the hinges. And because it would be supporting the doors, I securely glued and screwed it in place. I realised to get the cladding to run seamlessly from the door across to the edge of the box would require OSB behind the cladding, as I was planning to make the doors from cladded OSB. So I cut thin strips of OSB and screwed and glued these to the frame, followed by narrow pieces of cladding glued and pin nailed in place. I could then glue and screw, this time with those Loctite screws again, the full width or 45mm wide corner battens in place to the front and back edges of the box. As you can see again in this visual, they half span both sides so you can hide the cut edges of the feather edge on each. And now let's sit back and watch the ultra satisfying time lapse of the cladding going on, with some funk in the background. All that hard work on the frame and the box is suddenly taking shape, fired into place with these 50mm nails and my framing nailer. Yes, a bit of an indulgence, and sorry if you don't own one. You can of course use galvanised nails, but I had to buy it when I was re-roofing the garage after the gas-fired PAS load I hired kept misfiring, and I absolutely love this Hikoki gadget. Oh, and I built 2 jigs to help me keep all the spacings consistent. One to space a second piece of cladding up from the base, and then a stepped jig to do the rest. Actually, looking at this photo, if I just made the step jig a bit longer, it would have done both jobs. Oh! And so we're onto the doors. Again, I used an old sheet of OSB for the base material, cut with my plumb saw and planed a bit to fine tune the measurements. But this OSB is 12mm thick and I need to attach hinges, which I'm going to struggle to do in that. So I glued and screwed another piece of that cut down 45 by 70mm batten to one side. This not only gives me a really strong fixing for the hinges, bought by the way from Amazon, not the best quality but they'll do the job, but also hides the cut edge of the feather edging. I routed the door hinge rebates with my little trim router but forgot to do these, so it was back to the traditional process of using a chisel, which I'm afraid needs sharpening. If you haven't already got one, get a self-centering drill bit. I couldn't manage without mine now, it's just a complete game changer, although I've stupidly snapped the bit on this job. There'll be a link in the description, and with the doors hung I could glue and pin nail this time with 20mm long nails the feather edge boards to the OSB, and I closed off this gap at the top with an offcut from the top of another feather edge board. I'm really pleased with this outcome and the doors are super strong. Whilst we're chatting about the doors, I thought long and hard about waterproofing and have made them with this overlapping piece in the middle so rain can't get in. Remember, the doors are on the front of the frame also, almost full length as well, and by widening that vertical pillar I've also increased the overlap behind the door here, again to try and prevent driving rain penetrating around the edge and into the box. I had one very bent fence post outside the garage that I thought would be perfect for the feet. So I cut this initially into 300mm lengths but later shortened them to 200. Nice, that worked. And then treated the cut ends, which will be touching the earth, with the Bedec paint. In actual fact, they'll be sitting on tiles that we ripped up during the kitchen build. I had these brackets and screwed 2 on each foot on adjacent sides, and then comprehensively glued and screwed the feet to the underside of the box. The brackets look a bit close to the edge of each foot, but they were strong enough for me to pivot the whole box later in the day when I had to tip it forward to get to the rear after it had been lifted in place. That expanding wood glue truly comes into its own on jobs like this. Okay, let's talk ventilation. I couldn't make the doors full height because they'd clash with the sloping roof overhang. So I left a gap at the top and made it a top rail to go in the gap and project out above the doors. With, you've guessed it, more repurposed 3x2. That gave me an opportunity to introduce some ventilation, so I drilled 4 holes in the top rail with an auger bit, and after my skill threw in the towel I thought I'd pull out some of my old, more powerful drill drivers to see how they got on. I bought this mesh when I was producing rodent proof ventilation below the hot tub decking. I cut some small panels with my Dremel and then stapled fine mesh over the hole before gluing and screwing back in place the top rail. I did the same at the back of the box and introduced a batten around the top inside of the box, which will also cover up the top edge of the breathable underfelt as well as that mesh. The mesh will allow air to pass through the box whilst preventing flies and rodents from getting in. That's the theory anyway. And finally, we're on to the roof. And guess what? I'm making this hinge too. Probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to you to know that this was being made from, yep, another sheet of reclaimed OSB. I then did a bit of head scratching to work out how I could support the edges of the roof without it clashing with those opening doors. And I came up with an idea. I found a few sections of gravel board in that treasure trove outside the garage that were long enough to go around the perimeter of the roof, and I glued and screwed these down to the OSB. I also glued and screwed supports where the hinges were going to go. And then taking that final 7th length of 3x2, I cut 2 strips that would form the perimeter around the edge of the finished roof. I then gave it a quick sand to remove any sharp bits and carried it into the kitchen. Why? Because I'd bought this Skyguard shed rubber roof kit. I'll post a link in the description. And the garage was a little too chilly. I don't think you can apply the adhesive at below 4 degrees. You choose your size, building in overlaps, and get sent this 1mm thick EDPM membrane. And then it was just a case of following the pretty comprehensive instructions contained in the kit to apply the adhesive to the OSB and lay the EDPM on top. The following morning I applied a bead of the Bond and Seal mastic that comes with the kit. Special thanks here go to Andy on my Discord forum who kindly 3D printed me these mastic tube caps with my logo on them. I then screwed in place the battens I'd cut down, and which I've also treated the rear cut edge off with that Bedec paint. All that was left was to trim off the excess EDPM membrane. And the next day, after bedding in some tiles completely horizontally in the right position for the feet, I enlisted the help of an old friend to help me lift the storage box into position. And that was nearly it. On went the roof and some strap hinges that were left behind from a kit I bought a while ago. Not great quality, but neither were the hinges or bolts, but hopefully both will do the job. Of better quality actually was a swing latch, a lesson I suppose to look at listings carefully, and it's enormously effective at keeping the door tightly shut. And what a gorgeous day for the big reveal! 2 weeks ago this was just an idea in my head, and on the back of buying that 45 by 70mm framework, it's evolved into a storage box that has a premium look and feel, and I think for quite a large structure sits really well in our garden. Let's wait for the first downpour, but I'm pretty confident that this door design will keep the rain out. And I think my confidence is pretty well justified because there's proof of concept in this little box that sits just next to it, which I built last year for the consumer unit to provide lighting, heating, and who knows what else for our outdoor seating. A lot of people were skeptical as to how this would turn out, but it's dry as a bone and looks as good today as when I constructed it. And this doesn't even have that underfelt breathable membrane inside. The hinges, whilst not great quality, do the job, and that latch on the front speaks for itself. Now, a lot of you will be gleefully sharpening your pens to point out to me that I should have sloped this storage box backwards rather than forwards. And to head off those comments at the pass, I'm going to say this. Point 1. By sloping it forwards, there's quite a lot of protection from the weather. And by that, I'm talking about preventing the rain from getting in under the top of the door. And we're south facing here, we really do get pummeled by the rain. Point 2, if I'd sloped it backwards, all that water would have gone down the back onto the ground, rotted the gravel boards and possibly the fence behind. And with it sloping forwards, all that rain would just harmlessly drip into the lawn below. And I've created enough of an overlap on the front of the box for it to do that without splashing too much down the front of the box. And point 3, by sloping it forwards, when I open it up to access the cushions inside, I'm not having to delve over the highest point, which obviously is the back, to get to the stuff inside. What about this roof, opening of which may or may not be necessary, but as I got criticised for not putting storage in my kitchen bent seating recently, I thought I'd make sure this lid could be lifted up as well. And what I've done is bought some hydraulic stays on eBay, and I installed them this morning. Now they seem to be working, but the problem is they do put quite a lot of pressure on these hinges, which are not great quality. It wouldn't matter, there's not much force being put against them, but there is now. I've got these hydraulic stays in place, so I think that might need a little bit more work, possibly replacing those hydraulic stays with some sort of hydraulic pistons, if we decide we're going to use it often and the changes are justified. It'd be great to get your thoughts in the comments below as to what you would use in this sort of situation. And you do need to make this cut to the batten, as otherwise it projects past the hinge barrel. I think the inside is a pretty pristine space for those cushions, and without further ado, let's get them in. And we're done. Interestingly though, I wouldn't have wanted to make it any narrower, but size wise that's absolutely perfect. And the brilliant thing about this is I've got my haul back. And actually, benefit of that roof, it looks pretty full at the moment, but if you did want to cram extra stuff in, open up the lid and look how much extra space you've got. And I think this roof looks really smart. People improvise with all sorts of stuff for storage boxes. I don't think feather edge boarding would be waterproof on a roof of this pitch. And whilst you could use roofing felt, this is the first time I've used EDPM, and it's a joy to use, so easy. But oh look, we have some snow. The weather has delivered to give us a little trial. As you'd expect, the EDPM laughs in the face of this sort of weather. Now, in this sort of weather, in spite of what you'd think, the air is actually very dry, but hey, it's a good opportunity for us to have a look at the cushions and see how they and the box is performing. The good thing is the cushions feel completely dry. And I'm also glad to say that the roof is nice and dry as well. What about the costings on this job? Well, I've put together this list, which sort of has pretty much everything, all the main elements anyway. I've also included a full 50-metre roll of that Vent 3 underfelt, although of course you only need a few meters, but I haven't included the paint that I had lying around, or for that matter the nails and screws. But bottom line, we're under 400 quid, which is pretty good for something which is perhaps a couple of hundred quid, a few hundred quid cheaper than other similar options on the market, and is far superior in terms of being totally bespoke to what I need it for, with a bit of ventilation and a much nicer interlining thrown in. So that's it for today. Wow, this has been a bit of a marathon build, but hopefully you can understand why I've created a box that's a little bit overspec'd like this, and that it's given you some inspiration and ideas for your own storage box project, even if you don't copy this to the letter. Details of everything I talked about today will as usual be in the description below the video, and don't forget about that Woodworkers Guild of America premium membership offer. If you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You could do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.